I never considered myself the favorite grandchild. I was the quiet one, the one who didn't cause problems, but didn't attract attention either. My mother, Diane, made sure I understood early on that I was an extra, a leftover from a marriage she wanted to forget. When she remarried Gerald, an ambitious man who always eyed my grandfather's company like a starving wolf, I learned to stay invisible. Grandpa, however, saw me. He built his construction empire from nothing, brick by brick, callus by callus, and he respected hard work and loyalty more than charm. I spent weekends working at his side, hauling equipment, taking notes, learning by doing. He never said much, but every rare nod of approval meant more to me than all my mother's empty praise to Gerald. The day Grandpa passed away was cold and sharp, the kind of day where grief feels heavier just from the grayness in the air. At the funeral, standing beside his casket, I could feel the change ripple through the room. People weren't mourning, they were calculating. Who gets what? Who rises now? I was just bracing myself to survive the aftermath. After the service, we gathered in the family home, and that's when my mother made her announcement. She clinked her glass with a fork and smiled, too widely, too falsely. "From now on," she said, "Gerald will run Dalton Construction. As a family, we agreed it's best." She looked directly at me, daring me to speak. I swallowed my grief and stood up slowly. "No," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "I'm the owner now. Grandpa left the company to me." The room froze. Gerald's smile faltered first, then disappeared altogether. My mother's face twisted into something ugly and unfamiliar. "If you want to play little boss," she hissed, "then get out of our house, right now." I looked around, at the marble floors my grandfather had paid for, the paintings he had chosen, the memories he had built. Then I laughed. Not a polite laugh, but a deep, genuine one that left my mother gaping. Because Grandpa hadn't just left me the company. He had left me something else, something they had no idea about, and I couldn't wait to reveal it. The door slammed behind me, and for a second I just stood on the porch, feeling the chill of the late afternoon. I had no suitcase, no coat, nothing but the small purse clutched in my hand, and the will safely tucked inside it. Grandpa hadn't trusted banks, lawyers, or even family. He gave me the will 2 months before he died, sitting together in the cluttered study he called his office. "I built that company with my own hands," he said, "and I know who respects it and who just wants the cash." He slid a thick envelope across the table. "Don't trust anyone else, not even your mother." I thought at the time it was just paranoia. Now I knew better. I pulled out my phone and called Henry, Grandpa's old attorney. Unlike the rest of the vultures, Henry had a spine and loyalty to Grandpa that went back 40 years. When he answered, I didn't even have to explain. "I heard what happened at the funeral," he said quietly. "You have the original will?" "Right here." "Good. Meet me tomorrow morning at the firm, 8 sharp. We'll file everything before they even know what hit them." As I hung up, a deep, steady calm settled over me. They thought they could steamroll me like they always had. But they underestimated the one lesson Grandpa taught me best: never show your hand too soon. I booked a room at a small motel on the edge of town, the kind where nobody asked questions, and spent the night staring at the ceiling, rehearsing every word I would say. Not out of fear, out of cold, clear strategy. Meanwhile, back at the house, Diane and Gerald weren't wasting time. I could picture it. Gerald pacing in front of the fireplace, muttering about lawyers, family rights, and loopholes. Diane calling her socialite friends, spinning a story where I was the greedy, ungrateful child stealing her rightful inheritance. They had their connections, their influence, but they didn't have Grandpa's blessing, and they didn't have the second surprise he left me. It wasn't until morning that the motel's old landline buzzed in my room, unlisted, supposedly private. I picked it up and heard Gerald's oily voice. "We can still work something out," he said, smooth as butter. "You're young. You don't know how to run a company. Let's meet. Talk about arrangements." I almost laughed again, but I kept my voice steady. "No thanks. See you in court." As I hung up, I realized this wasn't just about the company anymore. It was war, and I had been preparing for it all my life. At exactly 8 the next morning, I walked into Henry's office. An old building with creaky floors and the faint scent of leather and dust. Henry stood when he saw me, his lined face serious but kind. He motioned me into a chair, and without wasting time, we spread the documents across his desk. He read every page slowly, carefully, occasionally grunting in satisfaction. Finally, he sat back and laced his fingers together. "They'll fight this," he said. "Hard, but the will is airtight. Your grandfather made sure of it." I nodded. "They're already plotting," I said quietly. "Gerald called me last night." Henry's mouth thinned into a hard line. "I expected as much. We'll file immediately to have you recognized as the legal owner. If they challenge, it'll drag through court, but we'll win. Just be prepared. They'll go after your reputation. They'll make it ugly." I was ready for ugly. I had lived with ugly my whole life. We spent the next 2 hours building the initial case. Henry drafted the official motion to submit to the court, and I signed every page with a steady hand. Before I left, he gave me a warning. "Stay away from them for now. Don't take their calls. Don't meet them alone. And most importantly, don't underestimate them." I promised. But I knew better than anyone. Underestimating them was exactly what Diane and Gerald would do to me, and that would be their first mistake. By noon, the court documents were filed. By 3, Gerald had already sent a text, casual, almost smug. "Hope you reconsider. No reason this has to get messy." I didn't answer. Instead, I met with Olivia Carter, one of the senior managers at Dalton Construction. A woman in her 50s, Olivia had been Grandpa's right hand for over a decade, and if there was anyone who knew the company's real workings, it was her. We met at a quiet diner off the main road, where the clink of silverware and low hum of conversation gave us cover. "I always wondered if Gerald would try something like this," Olivia said after hearing the story. She sipped her coffee and shook her head. "Your grandfather knew he couldn't trust them. That's why he gave you more than just the company." I leaned in. "What else?" Olivia smiled grimly. "He left you the land." She slid a folded blueprint across the table. "The headquarters, the warehouses, the biggest projects, they're all built on land that's in your name now, separate from the company itself. They can't touch it without your permission." I stared at the blueprint, my heart pounding. The land was worth at least another $50 million on its own. Without access to it, the company couldn't even function properly. Grandpa hadn't just given me Dalton Construction. He had made sure I controlled its beating heart. And that, I realized, was something Diane and Gerald would never forgive. By the end of the week, it began. The smear campaign. It started with whispers in town. Small, nasty rumors that grew louder every day. That I had tricked my grandfather in his old age. That I had manipulated a dying man into cutting out his real family. That I was unstable, greedy, disloyal. At first, I thought I could ignore it. I buried myself in meetings with Henry and Olivia, carefully laying the groundwork to formally assume leadership of the company. We crafted a plan to meet with the board members one by one to win their support before Diane and Gerald poisoned their minds. But Gerald was faster. An anonymous article appeared in the local paper, hinting at family disputes and legal irregularities concerning Grandpa's estate. It didn't name me directly, but everyone knew. My phone buzzed nonstop with reporters, old acquaintances pretending to check in, and distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. It wasn't just gossip. It was a strategy. Diane and Gerald were trying to strip me of credibility before the court ever heard my case. If they could paint me as a liar, a selfish opportunist, maybe they could sway public opinion enough to pressure me into settling, or better yet, backing down. Henry urged me to stay quiet publicly, at least for now. "The court cares about evidence, not headlines," he said. But it wasn't easy. Every time I passed a stranger's glance lingering too long, every hushed conversation that abruptly stopped when I walked into a coffee shop, I felt the pressure mounting. Then came the real blow. One of the senior board members, a man named Walter Reed, scheduled a meeting with me, then canceled last minute without explanation. Henry wasn't surprised. "He's close to Gerald. They're working the inside," he said grimly. It hit me harder than I expected. I had always known some people resented Grandpa's old-fashioned loyalty. I just hadn't realized how quickly they'd turn on his granddaughter when given the chance. Olivia stayed by my side, though. And so did a few others, quietly, carefully. Good people who had seen what Diane and Gerald were really like behind closed doors. But it was clear. I was outnumbered. And if I didn't find a way to fight back soon, the damage would be irreversible. I stood alone on the land Grandpa had left me, staring at the half-finished office park rising from the dirt. It wasn't just buildings. It was proof. Proof of everything we had built together. I wasn't going to let them take it. Not now. Not ever. By Monday morning, I knew silence wasn't enough anymore. If I didn't stand up publicly, Diane and Gerald would win by default. It was time to step out of the shadows. With Henry's cautious blessing and Olivia's encouragement, I scheduled an interview with The Ledger, a respected, neutral publication that still valued facts over gossip. Not the tabloids, not the local rumor mills. If I was going to speak, it would be on my terms. The journalist, a sharp woman named Laura Benson, met me at a modest cafe downtown. No recorders, no cameras, just 2 cups of coffee and a notepad between us. I laid out the facts. My grandfather's mentorship, my work history in the company, the original will, the land deeds. I didn't attack Diane or Gerald directly. I didn't need to. The truth painted its own picture. Laura listened carefully, asked smart questions, and left without promising anything. 2 days later, her article dropped. Legacy or betrayal? The battle over Dalton Construction. It was fair. It showed both sides, but for once, my voice was there too. People started looking at me differently after that. Not everyone believed me, of course, but the narrative shifted, even if just slightly, and that was all I needed. Meanwhile, Gerald's panic became obvious. He tried calling several board members into an emergency, informal meeting, without me. Olivia found out through back channels and tipped me off. "You need to be ready," she warned. "They're planning a vote of no confidence. They want you declared unfit to lead." It was laughable, really. I hadn't even officially assumed control yet. But if they could tarnish me enough internally, they could argue for a third-party administrator to take over, someone loyal to them, no doubt. I needed reinforcements. Enter Marcus Hale. Marcus had been Grandpa's project manager for over 15 years, tough as nails and utterly allergic to politics. I found him on a construction site, shouting orders above the roar of machinery. He saw me approaching, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked me in the eye. "About time you came to talk," he said. "I figured you'd need someone who actually knows what the hell they're doing." I smiled for the first time in days. With Olivia handling the office and Marcus commanding the field, I had the beginnings of a real support system. But it still wasn't enough. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday, and Gerald wasn't planning to play fair. He never did. The boardroom felt like a courtroom. 12 members around a heavy oak table, all polished wood and false smiles. Gerald sat near the head, too confident, his hands folded neatly, like a man who thought he had already won. Diane wasn't present, but her fingerprints were everywhere. In the lowered eyes, the half-glances exchanged behind my back. I sat at the opposite end, flanked by Olivia and Marcus. I wore black, sharp, unyielding. No jewelry, no bright colors. I wanted them to see discipline, control. Gerald stood up first, cleared his throat. "Given recent events," he began, "and the concerns circulating among our senior staff and stakeholders, I move for a vote of no confidence against our current leadership." He didn't even say my name. Coward. A few board members shifted in their seats. Others nodded almost immediately. It was clear. Gerald had been busy behind the scenes. Too busy. Henry had prepared me for this. I pulled out a thick file and slid copies down the table. Financial reports, project completion rates, profit margins under my interim oversight, already higher than they'd been under Gerald's temporary management months ago. Concrete, irrefutable numbers. "I suggest you review the facts," I said coolly, "before making a decision you can't undo." Silence. The only sound was the paper shuffling as board members flipped through the documents. Eyes widened. Frowns deepened. When the vote was finally called, it wasn't unanimous. Far from it. 7-5. In my favor. Barely, but enough. Gerald's face tightened, the vein in his temple throbbing. He stood up too fast, knocking his chair over, but he recovered quickly and forced a cold smile. "This isn't over," he muttered as he brushed past me on his way out, and I knew he meant it. After the meeting, Olivia squeezed my arm. "You did good," she said. But her smile didn't reach her eyes, because we both knew surviving the vote didn't mean the war was over. It meant it was just entering a new, nastier phase. That evening, as I reviewed project schedules in my temporary apartment, my phone buzzed. A restricted number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A woman's voice, low and hurried. "Watch your back. They're not just playing games anymore." Click. The line went dead. I sat there, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, feeling the weight of what was coming next. Gerald and Diane had failed to beat me legally. Now they were moving into territory where rules didn't matter. I wasn't just fighting for the company anymore. I was fighting for my future, and maybe even my life. The next morning, the first real shot was fired. Someone slashed the tires on my car, all four, clean and professional, while it sat in the courthouse parking lot. There were no witnesses, no cameras, just 4 flat tires and a mocking sense of vulnerability settling deep in my chest. I called the police. They took a report. Standard vandalism, they said. No suspects, no promises. Henry was furious when he heard. "Don't dismiss this," he warned. "It's a message, and it's only the beginning." Reluctantly, I agreed to hire private security. Something Grandpa would have grumbled about, but insisted on in a situation like this. A former cop named Vince Carter started shadowing me discreetly. A broad-shouldered, silent man who didn't ask questions. I hated the necessity of it, but I hated being a sitting target even more. Inside Dalton Construction, the atmosphere was getting heavier too. There were whispers of deals being made behind closed doors, contracts stalling without explanation, longtime suppliers suddenly reconsidering partnerships. Olivia worked overtime to hold the office together. Marcus kept construction sites moving with sheer force of will, but even their patience was starting to fray. "You can't fight ghosts," Marcus muttered one evening after a particularly frustrating meeting where another subcontractor dropped out without warning. "They're cutting off your oxygen, little by little." He wasn't wrong. Diane and Gerald were too smart to launch a frontal assault now. They were pulling strings quietly, starving the company from within, waiting for me to break. And some days, I came close. The isolation, the second-guessing, the feeling that at any moment the ground under me could crack open. One night, after another round of calls from anonymous numbers that hung up after a single ring, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the framed photo of Grandpa on my bookshelf. Him in his work boots, smiling, dirt smudged on his cheek. A real smile. Not like the ones Diane and Gerald wore. Not like the ones that disappeared the second you turned your back. "You didn't raise me to fold," I whispered to the photo. And I meant it. If they wanted a war of attrition, fine. I could outlast them. I would outlast them. Because while they played their games in the shadows, they forgot something crucial. I owned the ground they were standing on, literally and figuratively. And sooner or later, they were going to realize, you can't starve someone who knows how to survive on nothing. The first counterstrike had to be smart. Loud enough to shake them, but legal enough to protect me. I spent 3 sleepless nights with Henry and Olivia, combing through old company records, looking for cracks, for evidence, for anything Diane and Gerald might have buried before Grandpa's death. And finally, buried deep in archived emails and dusty accounting logs, we found it. A property sale. On paper, it looked clean, until we noticed the signature. Forged. Gerald had authorized the sale of a company-owned plot of land 2 years ago without Grandpa's approval, pocketing the money through a shell corporation. We had him. Proof of fraud. Criminal charges if I wanted to push it that far. At first, Henry urged caution. "Use it as leverage," he said. "Force them to back down quietly. Public court battles are messy." But I was done playing nice. I scheduled a full board meeting. No leaks, no whispers, just formal notices sent by courier. Mandatory attendance. No excuses. The day of the meeting, the air was electric. Even the employees lingering around the lobby seemed to sense it. Change was coming, one way or another. I waited until everyone was seated, then stood up and calmly placed a thick folder in the center of the table. "Before we begin," I said, my voice clear and cold. "I think there's something you all should see." One by one, the board members flipped through the pages. Bank transfers, emails, the forged signature blown up for clarity. Gerald's face drained of color. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. No defense, no excuses. Diane, who had slipped into the room late, tried to rally. "You don't understand how business works," she said sharply. "It's complicated." "It's theft," Olivia interrupted, standing beside me. "Plain and simple." The board moved fast after that, faster than I expected. Gerald was suspended pending a formal investigation. His shares were frozen. An external audit was ordered. I watched as the empire Diane and Gerald had tried to steal crumbled under their feet. It should have felt triumphant. It didn't. It just felt necessary. After the meeting, Marcus caught up with me outside the building. "You think they'll give up now?" he asked. I shook my head. They have nothing left to lose. And that made them even more dangerous. That night, a brick was thrown through the window of my apartment. No note, no signature, just shattered glass and the cold bite of air cutting into my living room. This wasn't business anymore. This was personal. The next morning, I moved into a hotel under an alias. It wasn't cowardice, it was survival. Henry insisted, and for once I didn't argue. Meanwhile, the police opened an investigation into the vandalism, but deep down, I knew they wouldn't find anything. Diane and Gerald didn't leave fingerprints. They left fear, and fear was harder to trace. Inside Dalton Construction, the atmosphere shifted dramatically after Gerald's suspension. Some employees, seeing which way the wind was blowing, began reaching out. Small gestures, a nod in the hallway, a whispered, "We're with you." It wasn't loyalty, not really. It was survival instinct. But I'd take it. I kept my head down and my circle tighter than ever. Only Olivia, Marcus, and Henry knew where I was staying. I trusted no one else. Not even some of the board members who had voted for me. Too many shifting loyalties. Too many knives pointed at my back. Diane, however, wasn't finished. A week after Gerald's suspension, an anonymous complaint was filed against me with the state's labor board, accusing me of workplace harassment and mismanagement. Pure fiction, but enough to trigger a formal inquiry. Enough to create headlines. Olivia stormed into my hotel room that night, slamming the door behind her. "They're trying to drag you down with mud," she said. "If they can't beat you legally, they'll drown you in scandal." I nodded slowly. They're desperate. That's good. Because desperation leads to mistakes. And I was waiting for one. The next evening, my opportunity came. Marcus called me from the construction site where one of our biggest projects was underway. "You need to get down here," he said grimly. "There's something you need to see." When I arrived, under cover of darkness, he led me behind the main building. There, partially buried under a pile of scrap metal, was a set of documents, hidden but not well enough. Invoices, equipment logs, proof that Gerald had been siphoning off construction materials to a private project for months before Grandpa's death. Millions of dollars worth, more fraud, more betrayal, and now, physical evidence tying him to it. "Who found this?" I asked. Marcus hesitated. "One of the site workers. Said he overheard Gerald bragging once about building his own empire." I stared at the papers, the weight of everything pressing down on me. It wasn't just greed, it was entitlement. They truly believed they deserved everything Grandpa built, no matter how they got it. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. And anger, I realized, was a powerful thing when you knew how to aim it. The next morning, I moved into a hotel under an alias. It wasn't cowardice, it was survival. Henry insisted, and for once, I didn't argue. Meanwhile, the police opened an investigation into the vandalism, but deep down, I knew they wouldn't find anything. Diane and Gerald didn't leave fingerprints. They left fear, and fear was harder to trace. Inside Dalton Construction, the atmosphere shifted dramatically after Gerald's suspension. Some employees, seeing which way the wind was blowing, began reaching out. Small gestures, a nod in the hallway, a whispered, "We're with you." It wasn't loyalty, not really. It was survival instinct, but I'd take it. I kept my head down and my circle tighter than ever. Only Olivia, Marcus and Henry knew where I was staying. I trusted no one else. Not even some of the board members who had voted for me. Too many shifting loyalties. Too many knives pointed at my back. Diane, however, wasn't finished. A week after Gerald's suspension, an anonymous complaint was filed against me with the state's labor board, accusing me of workplace harassment and mismanagement. Pure fiction, but enough to trigger a formal inquiry. Enough to create headlines. Olivia stormed into my hotel room that night, slamming the door behind her. "They're trying to drag you down with mud," she said. "If they can't beat you legally, they'll drown you in scandal." I nodded slowly. "They're desperate. That's good. Because desperation leads to mistakes. And I was waiting for one. The next evening, my opportunity came. Marcus called me from the construction site where one of our biggest projects was underway. "You need to get down here," he said grimly. "There's something you need to see." When I arrived, under cover of darkness, he led me behind the main building. There, partially buried under a pile of scrap metal, was a set of documents, hidden but not well enough. Invoices, equipment logs, proof that Gerald had been siphoning off construction materials to a private project for months before Grandpa's death. Millions of dollars worth, more fraud, more betrayal, and now physical evidence tying him to it. "Who found this?" I asked. Marcus hesitated. "One of the site workers. Said he overheard Gerald bragging once about building his own empire." I stared at the papers, the weight of everything pressing down on me. It wasn't just greed. It was entitlement. They truly believed they deserved everything Grandpa built, no matter how they got it. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. And anger, I realized, was a powerful thing when you knew how to aim it.